And I know some people figured out how to do the backdrop, and I should, but we're good to go? All right. Ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah,
Let's
do
do
this. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Today I have Dr. Lisa Allen as my guest. Dr. Allen is the Dean of the School of Education and a Professor of Education and School Counseling Program at Campbellsville University. Dr. Allen's current research interests involve grow your own certificate programs for teacher and administrator certifications, and how such GYO programs may reduce barriers for women and people of color advancing into administrator positions of schools and districts. Thank you for joining me. And before we get started, I'd like to ask you about the Grow Your Own Certificate program. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And what is that?
Well, there's no universally accepted design for Grow Your Own, but when you're talking about teacher preparation, or in our case, we use it for our administrator preparation programs. You're talking about a collaboration with school districts, utilizing some of them to practitioners in the field to co-teach courses with university faculty, and we just collaborate. And the beauty of the Grow Your Own programs is that they are situated within a school district, and all of the curriculum and assessment is developed around the needs of that particular school district. And everybody in the program is working on action research and solving problems within that district. So we have several of these programs going with individual school districts in Kentucky. We have one that is with 3 districts: Todd County, Russellville Independent, and Logan County. Those 3 went together in one, and we're getting ready to start one this fall with the Central Kentucky Education Cooperative, and that's 25 districts.
Okay.
So that'll be a much bigger program than we've done, but we're going to tailor everything to meet the needs of schools in Central Kentucky.
So the idea of sort of customizing it for the needs of that district. So you've worked with 2 or 3, and now you're about to expand for a much bigger sort of challenge. Yeah. Y'all ready for that? That sounds like a big.
I think we are. I hope we are.
Ready or not, here it comes, right?
That's right.
So when you say grow your own and customizable, so what was the? I guess what was the impetus of this? What made it something that y'all thought was? Because it sounds like getting away from generic, making it more really about what the district needs.
Right.
How did you, and how long have you been doing this? I don't remember.
Oh, goodness. Well, since the beginning of our principal program. Okay. I'd say we had our first Grow Your Own start in 2017, 2018. Okay. Actually, this was not my original brainchild. It was David Young. He was the Assistant Superintendent of Boyle County Schools. And he had this idea, and he came to me and he said, would we be able to do this with your principal program? And he was looking for something to offer in his district to grow their own leadership for their administrator positions. And he was also looking for something to keep teachers in Boyle County. So looking at improving retention among his faculty in that district, and it just took off.
And things that would matter to them.
Right, exactly.
Or even fine-tuning probably some of the generic things, but fine-tuning it towards what would meet the needs.
Right. So, for example, when you're learning about school law, you're learning about it in the context of things that have happened in your district. and how those were dealt with or how they should have been dealt with. You know, all the field experiences take place within the district. When you're talking about special education, it has to do with those issues in your district, finance and budget.
So not every district, I mean, every district's the same?
No.
Shouldn't we just...
No, every district isn't the same. When you look at budgeting, let's use school budget, for example, and you have a school budget project, and the budget, if you're budgeting for a large high school, say a Nelson County High School, back when I was there, it was a very large high school, had a very large budget, and it was a rural high school, so it had a different budget than, say, a school in Jefferson County, which would have been large, or a small
So already we've got a
school.
rural large school as opposed to an urban large school, and so the different populations, different, I guess, needs. Okay.
Different financial sources of income are different for different districts. So I think when you're talking about these grow your owns, the beauty of them, and there are these are transferable skills. So say I was in a cohort in Garrett County, we have a cohort there. Say I was in that cohort and then my family moved somewhere else. I would still have the same principal certification that I earned in Garrett County, and I could transfer that to another school, and I would have the skills while I wasn't exactly learning about the issues that are in the county I'm going to. I have the skills for dealing with those issues in another place, and so you can transfer
So skills
those
and content are pretty set, but then how you apply it are contextualized to the issues and challenges of that particular county.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, that's interesting because I know a lot of, and I hadn't really heard for education, but I know a lot of other disciplines are looking at that too, because number one, for the a student, it gives them a context. You know, I mean, we've been using case studies forever, and now just use the one at hand, right? You use something, and because it's so, it's right now and it's in their particular setting, it's they kind of already know it, so you don't have to do a lot of background, or you can go in depth in some ways. Excellent. And so that's going well? Y'all are looking at expanding this summer, is that what you said?
Yes, this fall we're going to start a principal program, and actually I feel like it's kind of come full circle because David Young, remember the person who had the idea to begin with, he is now the director at the Central Kentucky Education Cooperative. So he approached me about a year ago and he said, I've kind of got an idea. And he's always looking for new, fresh programming and providing helping the districts that are part of the cooperative. So he provides training, and they have like an initial Teacher Institute and Option 7 program that we've partnered with them on. And so he came to me and said, I think we could do another Grow Your Own. And
you don't feel like this is a test, do you? Like he wants to see, like, well, let's see what you've done with the idea that we started.
Well,
a little bit maybe.
I think he knows. I mean, he taught in that first program. He was the district administrator. He will co-teach in this one. We're expanding it not only to 25 districts, but we're starting with the principal program in the fall. If all goes well, we're wanting to expand it to our other administrator programs in January, offering them there in the same Grow Your Own format for the districts, and they're part of that Central Kentucky Cooperative. So
cool. Well, that's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
When we had talked about having a discussion and what would we want to talk about, one of the things that I'm really interested in, and you were kind enough to say, yeah, I'll go in and talk about it, has to do with just public schools and society, number one, and also and the public schools and how socially things have changed. So let me just start with the idea of public schools. What's the role of the public school? What's a goal? And I know, because I think, oh, well, everybody knows, but I don't think everybody really understands, because I think, yeah, educating the public would be an easy answer, but there's more to it, I think.
Well, I mean, I think when they were first founded, it was so, it was a civic-minded thing. When we started educating students in the United States in the early days, it was so that people could read and write and vote and take part in democracy. And it's really to further democracy. It's to allow all students, regardless of their background, regardless of the amount of wealth their family has or doesn't have, regardless of their ability. It's providing everybody the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And also to have an educated public that elects our judicial or our politicians, our political offices.
Yeah.
So
Our governing bodies. If you
right,
will.
right. So that's the purpose.
Wow, that's a pretty big.
Well, it's expanded beyond that even, because now I think public schooling does so much more than, I mean, it offers those opportunities and to educate the public for their future, but it's also fulfilling a lot of very needed services in the present now. A lot of, it just helps with, it helps parents with all kinds of things. I mean, if you look at COVID and how that impacted families, when the schools were shut down, what a dramatic impact that was on families. And schools still found ways to meet those needs, right? Your children who needed food, schools were still finding ways to deliver meals to children. For your students who needed instruction, schools were providing technology and instruction online. For your students who needed school counseling services online, those services were being provided. Students with disabilities who needed a special assessment and accommodations. I mean, districts were providing home visits and doing all kinds of things to meet the needs of
Still
students.
continue their service, but
Right.
with the challenges that the pandemic brought us.
Right.
And so that's I know the pandemic was a game changer across the board in many ways, and I'd like to come back to that. But because especially from from a public education standpoint, and you didn't really have to pay attention to the news that much to hear public education coming up over the past 6 months to 9 months. But I sort of want to get to, so when it first started, it was just let's educate folks so that we can have people that can read and write and be able to pursue a better life,
Right.
whatever that means. And then moving towards, okay, we also want to educate them, but we also want them to understand what it means to be a citizen and to participate in the democracy. And that's sort of where, I remember, being when I was in public school. And now it's changing education. In particular, you were talking about new services, or that it's providing something more. And this was before the pandemic, I'm guessing. But what realm does that other stuff fall into? What would you? I mean, so education being read and write,
Right.
and then sort of civic responsibility, like just a better, how to think
Right.
and rationalize and even
Right.
be creative.
Right.
And where would this new services come in? What do you?
Well, I think we've been heading this way for a while, but I do think right now we're at a point in our society where we have, especially since COVID, we have a lot of families and students who are experiencing a lot of emotional and social dysfunction. And I do think the schools now are becoming places where these needs for students are identified, and you know, students are getting the care that they need. In 2020, Kentucky passed legislation that defined, well, in 2018, Kentucky defined school counseling as a school counselor is a mental health provider in the schools. And then in 2020, they passed legislation that school counselors have to spend 60% of their day in direct intervention with students, direct one-on-one or you know, small group intervention, direct services, and that would leave 40%. And that was huge, because at various times in the year, school counselors had so many assessment and administrator responsibilities, they weren't able to provide that level of direct service. And then also in 2020, the state legislature made the goal, they called it a goal for schools to push toward, for it to be one school counselor to 250 students. Now, they didn't say it had to be that way, it's the goal. So I would say there are very few places still where you have one school counselor to 250 students. When I was a school counselor, it was 1 to about 400 in my school, and that was great. That was great at that time. So
to only have that many students that you
right.
had to
that you're responsible.
Yes,
yeah. yes. So anyway, but also, I believe it was 2020 when the legislature determined that school counselors were to be the head of trauma-informed teams, trauma action teams, and the school counselor, it was the school counselor working with teachers and administrators and mental health providers in the community, but to identify and provide trauma-informed services to students. And
it's sounding like almost a first responder sort of thing.
In a way, yes.
Somebody's got to be on the lookout for.
Right.
Which is a far cry from what I remember as a school counselor, which there were maybe 200-300 people in my school, high school, right?
Right.
And so I had a very limited, other than just a career counseling, like, hey, Thomas, what do you want to be when you grow up, sort of thing. And now you're school counselors are responsible for the mental health of students, or at least identifying that there might be an issue.
Identifying and helping students get the help they need.
Now, this wasn't just pandemic. Pandemic didn't cause all this. It's
no,
more of
the
the
pandemic
thing
hasn't caused all of it, but I think school violence and the way it had increased over the last decade, I think we were headed that way, and then the pandemic, I guess, was in 2019. A lot of this legislation was right before it and during the pandemic in Kentucky. So I just think the pandemic exacerbated and really speeded up situations that were already in motion. So school counselors are still responsible for career counseling, college preparation and counseling. I mean, that's still all on a school counselor's plate as well. So
one of the things that, and I think about from a classroom standpoint, I don't know the school counselor, but it seems like there was one time you looked at your class as a project. Now, this is my analogy, right? That the class was a project. Let's get the whole class, to perform well. And so I guess I imagined it as a project. Every class, every semester was its own project. And now I see it more like every individual in the class is a project. And if you're a school counselor with 250 students or more, and each one, now not all of them are as big as some projects kind of run themselves.
Right.
But that could be deceiving too, because not everything, at least from a counselor, and I don't know, but it just seems like that's an awful lot of folks to try to be caring for, and the role is expanded. You got to sort of be a lot of hats. It sounds like folks are wearing. How is it coping? How's it going out there with that?
I think in public schools, it's not the school counselor solely. The school counselors are heading up teams of individuals that are all working together to meet the needs of students. And of course, the front line is always the classroom teacher. So, but you've got school districts now have interventionists for all things behavior, for subject areas, for reading, for math. I mean, a lot of people that are part of teams now that meet the learning needs or the social and emotional needs, and often they are happening at the same time.
Gotcha.
A lot of it is, but yes, you're right. It is very much an individualized approach to educating students.
On these teams, the idea is maybe that everyone comes together to help, but it may be that if an individual shows up on a radar, then we should really pay attention, because there might be something going on that we all need to be involved with. I mean, is that part of the team? I'm just curious about the team's approach.
Well, a lot of times, and it kind of depends, but a lot of the trauma teams that I'm hearing about include special education.
Trauma teams alone, just the name,
yes,
right?
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's okay. I think
that
it's
so these teams come together and they assess a student, like, okay, what are you seeing? Or, I mean,
a lot of schools use different kinds of inventories. There are companies now that have assessments you can do, risk type of assessment, or and it kind of depends on the situation. If it's learning needs, there are questionnaires and assessments, checklists kind of assessments. And I know, like, I teach a class in school crisis prevention and intervention. And so we look at a lot of toolkits by in particular SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association nationally, and all organizations publish these toolkits, and they're full of checklists. If you're suspecting a mental illness, or someone is suicidal, or whatever the issue is, they have all kinds of inventories. And so teachers and school counselors and principals, they all work together, and they utilize these resources to help make sure students are getting their needs met, whatever they are.
Well, I guess on one hand, it does. At least you have other folks. It's not just school, especially with all these inventories, these checklists that you're talking about. Having someone maybe more appropriate to help, or like, this is in your discipline.
Right.
Help us understand what's going on.
Right.
So that's a big change. The role of the school counselor.
Yeah, it's a huge change, and it's probably over the last 5 years has been the biggest change I've seen.
So you were mentioning there was a trajectory towards change, and then it sort of hit about the time the pandemic hit, which brought its own challenges of, especially if you were talking about being more interactive with the student.
Right.
Like being more knowing what's going on and one-on-one with them. And then all of a sudden you have all these mandates to do that.
Right.
But trying to figure out how to do that had to be a huge challenge, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The folks that everybody had to deal with the whole work from home thing, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that was
And that was very challenging. It was challenging for families and for students. It was challenging for teachers. It was challenging for everybody.
Yeah.
You know.
How should school counseling work for the student? Like if you were to say, okay, I guess maybe the outcomes is how you might express it in educational terms. You know, what's that look like for the student?
For the student, school counselors manage what's called a comprehensive school plan, a school counseling program. And part of that is for individual students to, be able to come talk to the school counselor, work with the school counselor if they feel like they have a problem they want to talk about. So on an individual basis, students need to be able to access their school counselor. But also, school counselors then, in working with students and working with parents, through surveys and questionnaires, they discover needs in the school. Looking at data, maybe looking at attendance data. Whatever they're using, they may see issues. Perhaps there are a lot of referrals for behavior like anger management type things. So in those cases, then a school counselor might develop a group, a small group. And so students, that come to them about different issues, they might refer them to a small group. Maybe it's a small group for students whose parents have gotten a divorce, or it's a small group for students who have social anxiety, whatever they see. And so they would start a small group. In the elementary schools, a lot of times teachers go into classrooms and they work with groups of students on different anti-bullying or just any kind of social, helping students be more socially and emotionally healthy, helping them to learn how to get along with each other. So, always those types of things. And then, of course, in high school, well, not just high school, it starts in elementary school now, but college and career preparation, but really in high school, middle school and high school, that's where that is just vital. So students will work individually with counselors on their schedules, on their college plans, all kinds of things like that. And when you're talking about counseling with students for college and career, you might take a whole classroom of students, if you're a high school counselor, and do a career assessment with them, and then you might meet with them individually about the results of that career assessment and help them develop a plan. So
that sounds like a lot of work, and not only, there's something to be done at the elementary school. Now, I guess there's probably, depending on how large the school system is, there's a number of people doing a number of different things, but it really sounds like the overall goal and the role has changed. What about so counseling from what you might think of as psychological counseling? Is that something that y'all have to, because that's a big, I'm just wondering, is that even encompassed in some of what you do? Because
school counselors are not therapists. So there are, we have to be able to identify, recognize warning signs. But if a student needs therapy, then school counselors will make a referral we'll work with parents.
Okay.
A lot of districts have now qualified mental health school counselors are now identified that way as well, but people whose job it is to do therapy within the district, School counselors still, like for instance, there are some counseling theories that I used a lot as a school counselor: solution-focused, brief therapy, choice therapy. But I was working with students on smaller issues that just required more quick. We can do this in a few sessions, and then
I'll uncovering some really deep.
Right.
Cognitive and emotional stuff.
Right, but if I had a student who I felt like really would benefit from therapy or from more intensive, like I have a student who is suicidal, and we've talked about it, they have a plan, I know they're suicidal, then I'm sending them somewhere else for a threat assessment. I call their parents in, we get them to somebody. And sometimes that's outpatient, sometimes it's inpatient, but it requires more than I'm able to give right there at the school.
Yeah, and it sounds like some of it might even involve, families.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it gets, once you start going down, some of the issues, and I would like you to expand a little bit more on what some of the challenges are in today's educational system, our public education, and you just brought up one, suicide. Now, I mean, that's one that isn't new, but it sounds like over the past few years, and especially with the pandemic, that's been exacerbated. You talked about violence in the home and things. Wow. That's
I just think the pandemic made everything worse. I mean, our students are dealing with anxiety and depression and whatever their families are experiencing, their parents are experiencing. You think about how anxious everybody was, especially at the beginning of this pandemic when we didn't know what it was and people were dying and we didn't know how it spread. All that anxiety that parents were feeling, their children were picking up. And a lot of times children react to stress the way they've seen their parents react to stress and anxiety. And so if parents tend to internalize everything like that, children will internalize it. And so
for a time.
Right.
And then all of a sudden
then
it's
it comes
external.
out. Yeah, it's external. And so, I mean, children are just dealing with so many feelings and emotions, and as a result of this pandemic, suicide is up. It's up among all age groups, but it is suicidal ideation, suicide, attempts are up.
And I've heard that the nihilistic sort of outlook, like there's nothing good and there's nothing ever going to be good. I think I've heard that that's sort of on the rise.
I think so. I think another thing that contributes a lot to this is the internet, and I think that's probably part of the reason things are happening at a faster pace too, because there's so much on the internet. I know my classes, my students talk to me about TikTok and some of the really alarming programs on TikTok that these are elementary school counselors who are, having to monitor just really scary stuff and send out notices to parents, letting them know, be aware, this is going on. It's something.
I don't want to know. I mean,
part
of me does, just,
I know.
But on the other hand, I don't want to be any more cynical than I am.
Right.
But but this is what's going on. I mean, TV was monitored in my house. I mean, I I remember MASH being a no-go for, okay, y'all go to bedtime. Y'all can't watch this show.
Right.
And now, folks would go, MASH, that's, there's nothing, why? But and that was the only real technology other than the radio. And now we have screens. I mean, like you're everywhere.
Yeah.
And these elementary school kids are bringing this to school, and school counselors are uncovering it or finding out about it. I'm in awe of some of the things that the public schools have to deal with. I mean, that and what content you can, provide. But that's a whole nother. So how are the counselors holding up? I mean, do y'all need a small group for
small
yourself?
Group, they do. We do talk about their mental health, and I think they hold up as well. It's a hard job. You get into it, and it's going to be hard. You do, but sometimes it can be overwhelming, and so. I always encourage my students, find outlets to just get away from it some, but when especially those first few years, it's overwhelming almost.
So do you see students that are, they've gotten their bachelor's and then they just go right into a master's, don't have a lot of sort of practical experience, or do you see a lot, and now we're talking about at the master's level where you're doing or is it more folks who've been in the game for a while and then they've decided, okay, and so they have a little bit more, I guess, practice and hands-on experience. What are you seeing in your programs?
Not a lot of first or second year teachers. Used to be you could not be a school counselor until you'd been a teacher for at least a year. So, a lot of people, that wasn't their first master's degree that they got. Like I did school counseling as part of my Rank 1 program. But now Kentucky, and it's been this way for a while, you don't even have to have a teaching background to be in school counseling. So a lot of students then in our master's program are coming in with bachelor's degrees in social work, psychology.
Is this because of demand? There's just so much, if they're saying every 250 students have to have a...
Well, that's not happening. That's not happening. I know that's not happening. It's a goal.
Right.
And I think it's a great goal, and I hope we get there.
Well,
I
but
do
the
hope we
need's
get
out there.
It
You've expressed all of these changes, and it's affecting every individual, every student to some level.
It is. It's... I don't know where I was going with that thought. Where was I going?
You're talking about other folks from other disciplines coming in to be able to, and I was just wondering if that's because there was such a demand, or because you need some folks with these other experiences because you do so much, and specifically that cognitive, emotional level and psychological level. I wouldn't feel comfortable being at that, having to make, it's one thing to say, hey, this individual might need, you to talk to them. It's a whole other thing to try to get in there. And
you have very specific indicators. So, if you had the training, you would feel much more comfortable with it. Then I'm sure you do. Yes, I'm sure if you had the training, you would be more able, you would feel like you could do it, and you could do it. But I think, we have a terrible crisis in our schools of teacher shortages and school counselor shortages and principal shortages. I
didn't know all that.
Yes, there is a terrible shortage of people in public education. And that's not getting better. It's getting worse.
So where does that trajectory lead us? I mean, so.
Well, right now the state is trying to come up with all these different ways to certify teachers and school counselors and principals. We have alternate certification programs. You know, there's a lot of different, so.
Well, what's the factor? So here's what I see, because I'm the faculty advisor for the National Leadership Honor Society. Education, out of all the ones I send out, education probably has the most folks.
Great.
I mean, so they're intelligent,
Right.
they're leaders, and then they get out there, and what happens?
It's a really hard job, and we have to make sure we're getting people into it. That I think it's important for people to understand up front the challenges that they're going to meet. And you know, I worked in the public schools for 22 years, and it was rewarding, and it was fulfilling, and I felt like I was making a difference. But it's a hard job, and you're not paid extremely well for your work. And
if you're in it for whatever reason that's not about, well, number one, we know it's underpaid, and then the other thing, what I just heard you say, and I think it's what I would say is purpose or passion. That if you're really not into it, if you thought, well, I'll just go home and I'll teach social studies, you know, and I'll retire or something.
right,
That's a long time to do something that you don't like, and especially if you have to be so focused on the students. You know, like I said, it used to be the class was a project. Now every student's a project. So how do you, I mean, you do teacher prep. How do you try to encourage folks to find that passion or that purpose?
Well, I think a lot of them are coming to us that way, and we have the luxury of teaching in a university where we tell students to find their calling. Like the students I work with here at Campbellsville, they feel called by God to be in public schools, in public education. So it's not as hard as you would think to find people who are passionate.
Were Mr. and Mrs. Campbellsville both ed students?
They were both. Yes,
well,
they
y'all
were.
Are killing it. Y'all are rocking over there.
Yeah, I have to say, well, this senior class, all of our senior classes are good, but this one is outstanding. And but I think students who come to us are coming to us because that is our focus. Servant leadership is our focus. And so I think that in particular at Campbellsville University, our students are passionate about getting into schools and making a difference. Our responsibility as teacher educators, we need to make sure they have a realistic view of the school they're walking into, of the job. Because a lot of times when students come to us, they remember what kind of students they were. And a lot of times they were good students. And
they like to learn.
Right, they liked it.
Yeah.
They enjoy it, and so they have to learn how to work with students who, honestly, I think more students would enjoy it if they didn't have these other issues going on, the anxiety, the depression, those things take away from.
Like they're not even prepared to learn because there's something going on.
Right.
And they're just, that's got their attention. And then to have to sit in class and focus can be a real, a turn off, I guess. I don't know what the right
That's
word.
true. That's true. Well, they're just not, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, your brain isn't functioning the same way everybody else is.
And we're talking about elementary school.
Yes, we are.
I mean, not just high school and I've always heard middle school was if I ever thought about teaching, I was always told, don't teach middle school. Then the people that do always say, oh, I love my kids.
Right. Well, they are special. That is a very challenging age to work with.
But even in elementary, having the anxieties and I just remember elementary being carefree. Yeah, I was ready for the bell to ring at 3 o'clock, but I didn't really feel like the weight of the world was on me.
Yeah.
So how when you're preparing teachers and school counselors to go into this setting that's really changed in the last decade for sure, and in the past 5 years even more drastically, what do you tell them? Like, what do you sort of have them focus on? Like, okay, you're ready, but let me what's their biggest challenges going in first day or second?
Oh, classroom management is huge. It's a huge challenge. Yeah, that's every beginning teacher's biggest challenge is managing their classrooms. So we're working with them to help them learn strategies.
And more so now than before?
Oh, yes.
Because of the technology, or just because of all the social issues?
I think all the social issues and the things we've been talking about just make classroom management. You have more behavioral issues with the increase in anxiety and the other, home life situations that students and technology. I mean, they are now being bombarded with images and visuals, and teachers have to keep up with all that. They have to be able to grab their attention and get them passionate about their content. One thing that we've done in the School of Education, we started, I'm going to say, I think it was right when the pandemic was starting, but as part of our strategic plan, because the state had, mandated trauma-informed teams and trauma-informed instruction, we have a
trauma-informed instruction.
Right.
Okay, you got a lot of stuff to.
Well,
anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
We have a committee of faculty, and it's headed up by Dr. Flanagan, and Dr. Rodriguez worked with her. They did some research on trauma-informed care in the public schools, and they interviewed school counselors and then just trauma-informed practices. And they've been doing this since about 2018. And actually, Dr. Flanagan, Dr. Magruder, and Dr. Fulks all applied for a grant, the Kentucky Excellence in Educators Program. It's a grant, and they're getting it. But this committee over the past 3 years have been investigating best practices in trauma-informed care and instruction, and along with this committee of faculty from all of the areas that we have, they have been developing instruction and modules. And so this KEEP grant, now they have the KEEP grant that's going to help us implement it into all of our courses. But a lot of it's been implemented in I know in the coursework.
So an educational module about trauma.
Just best practices.
So I want, but the trauma instruction is trauma-based, or what'd you call that?
Trauma-informed.
Informed instruction.
And what that really means, you identify your students who have these needs, these learning needs based on factors of trauma in their life, and then you find the best strategies for helping them focus or helping them, so these are trauma-informed practices. And but I know that a lot of them have already been implemented, because when I was reading my portfolio, we score portfolios this time of year, and when I was reading my portfolio, the one I was reading had actually discussed the trauma-informed practices in her classroom management plan and how she was going to utilize those practices to help her students manage her student behavior in the classroom. So
it's more, what I guess what I heard you saying is it's a module that you could insert into your instruction to help teachers that you're preparing to better understand how trauma affects instruction and how you might teach an individual, or how you might help them learn.
Right, their students' ability to learn. So, and we are the faculty there on this committee, so our early childhood faculty, which they already do this, our early childhood program, a lot of what we're adapting for the whole School of Ed is coming from our early childhood faculty who already do this, but with each age level, with school counseling, with our administrator programs. You know, we have a faculty who's working to get some of those best practices implemented into the coursework in these programs. So
you have I'm just thinking about an underpaid and the need to individualize and already overworked, just trying to, make sure everything's set for the education day, what we're going to do tomorrow and getting ready for that.
Right.
And then doing it, which is an all-day job. And then now this sort of idea of even fine-tuning instruction to meet the individuals, not just their cognitive needs, but their emotional and psychological needs, if I'm hearing correctly. Does that sound about what you've said?
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot. It sounds like, why would anyone want to be a teacher?
It
with
is
all
a
of
lot.
that?
It is a lot. And I think the people that want to be teachers, it gets back to the whole purpose of education. It's to help make people's lives better. So make children's lives better and students' lives better. And we do that, and families' lives better. We do that by providing them with the tools, the knowledge, the skills that they need to move on to that next level. So if you're an elementary teacher, you're helping them they're preparing them to be successful in the middle school. You're always just preparing them. I mean, that's the reason anybody becomes a teacher. It's not, I'll be honest with you, when I started back in 1988, I loved English.
Seems like last year.
I know, it does. I know. I was a high school English teacher. I loved English. But more important than the English, I wanted to help my students either go to college or to have the skills with language to be able to develop a good resume so they could get a job, whatever. I wanted to help them accomplish things.
It was more than just teaching English.
Right.
It was sort of helping them navigate life a little bit or get a start on that.
Right. And I think that's why teachers get into it. I really do. Well, like I said, here at Campbellsville, we are called. We know we are called. I felt called. So when I went into the classroom,
As you look forward and think about where things have been going, what do you think some of the challenges are going to be for the next couple of years, maybe up 5 years? Or is that just way too hard to even predict at this point?
Well, there are going to be some real academic deficits for students. Helping them catch up. While I think their teachers did an outstanding job, dealing with a public health crisis that no one was prepared for. Yeah. And there are going to be some learning deficits. There just are.
So that's coming our way in higher education.
Oh, yes.
Well,
yes.
I guess all the way through, right?
Yeah.
You've got an elementary, junior high, and high school that have all experienced similar sort of hiccups or, so that's going to be, so I hadn't even thought about that. We've talked a lot amongst colleagues about, we're going to get the pandemic kids. And the students who were under the pandemic coming up to college, what's that going to look like? And so there's some discussions about that. But I hadn't even thought that. Oh wait, we're just getting the beginning of that. We're going to have elementary.
Oh yeah.
In what? 10 years, get some elementary school kids who had that and whatever ramifications. That has, we don't even know how, all the things that it is going to bring our way.
Schools are working right now to catch students up I mean, and all the students are behind. It's not just students with disabilities or students in poverty. Your gifted students are a couple years behind where they could have been, or maybe not 2 full years, but maybe a year behind. Although I did read an interesting article towards the beginning of the pandemic of gifted students who were actually accomplishing, they were just going ahead and moving ahead. They were, which is a really interesting thought. But with individualized instruction, they were able to advance at a quicker rate. So,
well, that always brings up one of the things I'd like to talk about is technology and in particular artificial intelligence. How do you think that's going to impact education, public education?
By artificial intelligence, you mean more self-directed learning, or?
Possibly, or even avatar driven,
teachers,
things like that, or adaptive, and I know there's some adaptive already going on, but what do y'all see in this?
I don't know. I mean, I know in teacher ed, with school counseling, there are avatar programs you can get where they act like the students in your classroom, or in counseling, or for
so
principals.
A virtual reality
sort of thing. I hadn't really, I'll be honest with you, I haven't really thought about having avatars for teachers. I think the pandemic has demonstrated, you have to have a sophisticated level of technology for that to really work.
Right.
And I'm not sure school systems are equipped with the levels of technology they would need.
So it might be a more private school sort of scenario where if you can afford it, you can have, because what little research I've done in it is really pointed towards, adaptive learning, number one. And I know in industry they do a lot of that. If you've got that skill, we're going to, we'll test you a little bit on it, but we're going to move on.
Right.
So an outcomes sort of base, but adaptive in what needs to be learned, what job are you going to get, what do you need to learn for that sort of thing. So that's industry. But then the idea that there would be these virtual classrooms where you would almost like you'd think of a game scenario where the teacher would be there, but maybe as themselves, but the students, it would still be synchronous, but not having to be in the same locale. So,
I think we'll get there. I think we will. I think there will always be a need for teachers. There's always going to be. When we're talking about social and emotional issues, there's always going to be a need for a person to be there and to notice and recognize and find the best methods for learning. But I know even with like assessment, in the schools now, they're using assessment programs where, let's say it's math. A student can, on technology, take a math assessment. The computer can then design a lesson very quickly for the things that the student missed on that assessment. Everything can be very individualized. And I see things like that in the very near future.
Yeah,
but
I think that makes a lot of sense.
But I also see, like, the state has started a whole new assessment system again for students this spring, and I was hearing that schools are going to have to do it all through technology. But there are still a few school systems that are getting waivers so that they don't have to have their students take all their tests on on a computer.
Because they can't support the technology?
That's what I think.
There's not access to
I think there's not. I think there are places in Kentucky where it's still not access to.
We take a lot of things for granted, I think.
We do. And I think until we get to that place, we can't really, I don't think avatars and things like that are going to take over until we get to a place where everybody has access. Everybody, no matter where they live, no matter what school they go to, they have, just really sophisticated technology. I don't think it's going to happen.
what about school counselors? I mean, you could just have
an avatar.
An avatar sitting
well,
over
I think
there.
they kind of, I don't know that they had an avatar, but there was a lot of virtual school counseling going on during the pandemic.
I can't even imagine how that must be to be trying to build rapport, and maybe it's a traditional idea of rapport is being able to be with someone and just talk to them, and even the nonverbal cues and all of that. I think from a school counseling standpoint, and even from a teacher standpoint, that's huge. That's a big part of what we do in terms of that individualization that we talked about. I don't think you could replace that necessarily.
No, I don't think you can replace it at all. But I do think technology is a great tool, and I do think as schools we will get better with it. We just will. But we got to get it to everybody first, you know. And I do think the pandemic, if there was anything good that came out of this pandemic, I think we did get a lot of technology to a lot of students and families, you know,
and we learned to use the technology.
Yes.
Oh, well, we've always had that. Yeah, but it hasn't been a requirement until now. And then all of a sudden, we all got really good at using something like, you know, the video conferencing and those types of things. One of the things that I also want to touch on is we talk about free speech and when I'm having these discussions, and I'm just curious because one of the things that you said earlier was that you educate them, we educate students, and then we also want to make them productive members of society, including the idea of being a good citizen and participating in our democracy.
Right.
So where does free speech come in there, and from your perspective, is that something that we need to instill in our children about what free speech is and how to use it?
I think we need to teach our students to use free speech responsibly. I believe wholeheartedly in freedom of speech. I do, and I am opposed to censorship, completely opposed to it. But I think if I see an issue in our society that I don't think people are always the most responsible with their abilities to say what they want to. And I think we need to teach our children that words matter and have consequence, and they need to think before they speak. But not that their opinions are valuable, but just I think sometimes there just seems to be so much controversy, conflict that and I think with social media, people just jump in, and actually I don't even look at social media, so I'm going with that assumption.
I've started a fast. I'm fasting from and to some degree the news, but I think, but that's also knowing that part of what we have to do is be informed, because part of what we do, as you mentioned earlier, is we elect governance and people that represent us. And so there's this, it's difficult to be able to find the things that really help you be informed, to make decisions, but at the same time, not being overwhelmed with just all of the things that are going on. So as students, I mean, it's just it's an onslaught. If you're on social media all the time, which I don't remember what the average per day is, but it's up there in the hours. I mean, it's not 30 minutes a day or even an hour or two. Like there. So how do you teach that? I mean, that seems like something that we sort of need to do a better, maybe not do a better job, or even do a job like, here's something to be aware of.
I'm not sure that's something that we really, I think maybe that's an avenue and I don't know though. I hear commentators on the right say the public schools trying to like brainwash all our children, so I don't know if we should teach this. And I think we should. I think we just should teach children to be responsible and to consider sources. Yeah. And we do that when we're talking about research or anything like that. And I think we just need to do that to help them
respect.
Consider.
I mean, as a virtue, to respect others,
right, and their opinions and their right to have them, and yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and it's not it's a societal issue. It's not something that should be just on the public school. Okay, y'all get this right. Yeah. With all the other stuff you got to do and being underpaid, y'all get the free speech thing right. I mean, I think it's part of every one of us needs to start being an example of discourse and just being able to agree that we might disagree. But I think we have so many things in common. This is so many more things that we would agree on.
Right.
The one thing that even if we agreed opposite ends of the spectrum, there's a lot of stuff in between that we could say, I think. So is there anything that you want to add about public schools today? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. I can't. No, I can't think of anything else.
Okay, we appreciate you being here and talking with me and just helping me better understand public education and what's going on, especially, and would love to have you back.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. And if you would like, you can subscribe on the buttons below, and you can know whenever we launch a new podcast. And thank you for reviewing.